have that protection in case somebody does access any of these systems and abuses their privilege. So, you know, earlier I was talking threat modeling. So what we talk about is somebody gets in there who is authenticated and has a certain level of authorization. If they get that elevation of privilege, then they can be charged under this act. Okay? So it's illegal access computers and networks without permission. How many of you, well, I was at RSA this year. It was really cool because Matthew Broderick did the keynote talking about hackers. All right, and he relayed the story about how he got called into the White House and had to talk to Ronald Reagan about hacking. And he's like, I don't know, I'm just an actor. I don't know what any of this stuff means, you know? But it was kind of interesting to watch him talk about that. But that's what spurred a lot of this information to be taking place, because it's like you're seeing it in the media, in the culture, and stuff like that. Hacking has become mainstream. All right, so we have that out there. So they decided we better make laws on how to protect ourselves from these hackers, and how can we prosecute them? Because, you know, you had a lot of people say, you know, information should be free, information should be shared. And if you're old like me, you remember the old days of DARPANET, and when you got on at your university, and ARPANET, and you could connect to different schools, get in their library, grab their information, borrow some of their processing time, you know. I'm so old, I remember I had to do programs on punch cards. Yeah, some people like remember that. But thanks, Bob. So we had that, but I mean, I remember first time I got on there, and I was like, cool, I'm on UCLA's network computer, looking up stuff and papers from their library, you know, and oh wait, I can run an econometric model on their stuff. So I was able to do some cool stuff, and I thought that was really neat. And then I'm like, I've got an AOL account. I can telnet to it from my home. And I remember the IP address. And so I just and I'm like, oh my God, I can connect to UCLA's network from my home computer. And I just had to enter the same credentials I entered from school. Lo and behold, you know, I remember that little username and password we were supposed to use, because it was the same username and password for everywhere. And I could get in. So it was really kind of cool to do that kind of stuff. Now, if I was not allowed, then I could be prosecuted under this law. And that's where you get the guys like the FBI or Department of Homeland Security these days coming in and knocking at your door. You know, it prevents, you know, they'll charge you with the crime. This is why most of the hackers end up in jail, like the Free Kevin Mitnick movement that happened back in the early 2000s. A lot of these hackers, you know, would get caught and stuff like that. If you ever listen to any of the 2600 magazines or any of that, they would talk about how that stuff should be legal and all that. You know, opinions vary, but it did allow for civil and criminal penalties to be created, and fines, imprisonment, and all that happened. So the next one is the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. Okay? How many of you ever watched movies and you see those, like mob movies especially? Wiretapping. Okay? You know, you see that, or like it's on the TV show The Rookie, they're like listening in on the Colombian drug cartels from some hospital room or something like that. You know? Have y'all seen those shows? Or like Goodfellas or any of those? You just see all these things where they have these wiretaps. Well, this is the law that allows that. So the law was actually expanded to where the government can actually, you know, law enforcement can actually extend that to electronic communications. All right, what do we mean by electronic communications? Well, if you read this, it's very frickin' vague, all right? It's very broad on what electronic communications can be. This could be cell phone traffic, you know, because it's digital nowadays, right? It's no longer an analog signal. It could be your emails. It could be any sites you're visiting, all right, if they have a warrant to tap, okay? So the Stored Communications Act actually lets them go and look at what data you have stored. And now this is particularly important because how many of you store data in the cloud? How many have a OneDrive or Google Drive? You could get penned, you know, if they do a pen trap test and decide to take a look at your data, they can go to Google or Microsoft, not even tell you, and actually look at your data if they want, okay? So, of course, you have the Pen Register Act, and that governs the use of devices, you know, the dialing, routing information. They can go in there and grab all that from there. And so, one of the things is, though, the Wiretap Act, it does limit the thing to the scope of whatever the warrant says it is. All right, so if they're finding things that are not pertain to the scope of the warrant, then you have to look and see, you know, they have to kind of disconnect and kind of move somewhere else, especially if it's a voice communication and all that. So this applies to like private communications, emails, phone calls, stored electronic data, and the violations can result in criminal charges, fines, and civil liability. So in the course of business, remember, anything you put online, if it might be illegal, reconsider doing it. That's the thing. So like, well, that wouldn't deal with me, you know, I'm just a network administrator here. Well, if somebody's doing something like insider trading or something like that, that could bring you in culpability-wise, okay? So just consider that, or if somebody's doing something illegal on your network, and I'm not, you know, we're not talking about the free transmission like for an ISP. I worked for a software company, a very large one, in which somebody on their lab system set up a for-profit server showing pictures of people in compromised positions, well, willingly being in compromised, exposed positions. Wink, wink. You know, kind of rhymes with corn back in those days. All right? So he had a side job, and he was using the company's lab machines at his desk with the direct wire tap out, and he was making a little e-commerce cash on the side. Now, could the company be held liable for that? Especially if it was somebody, you know, who might happen to be underage or something like that. Yes, this employee eventually got discovered and terminated. All right. So how many of you work for a federal contractor or a federal agency? I'm not playing spot the Fed. All right, I promise. But if you work for a federal contractor, you should be familiar with FISMA, okay? And this is what causes you to have to adhere to government standards. So if you work for a company that does federal contracts, a lot of people do that and they don't realize it. A lot of times you have to understand what is required by this. That's just going way off the screen there, I'm sorry. You know, in my pre-monitor it showed perfectly rendered. So U.S. law aims to enhance, you know, federal, you know, basically it's a Modernization Act. You have standards set. It requires continuous monitoring out there. It establishes responsibilities for managing and reporting security risks out there. It applies to any federal agency and all of their contractors out there. So this is why I mentioned this. A lot of people who do business or have a company that does business with the government. And we see a lot of that out there. It emphasizes the protection of data and any of the systems around the federal government, too. So this is the law trying to say, hey, we need to beef it up. We don't want to have any supplier vulnerabilities, basically. And you have to do regular audits and all that with that. So it doesn't sound like many people here work for anybody who sells to the government. Now here's one that's near and dear to my heart. The Child Online Privacy Protection Act, otherwise known as COPA. All right. So how many of you have information like that does has any kind of public website or anything like that? Anybody have a website that's public, or anybody have a commerce site where you sell stuff online? All right. So yeah. So this might affect you whether you know it or not, okay? This basically says you cannot it says you cannot collect information on children under the age of 13 online. All right, how many kids will go ahead and check that? Yeah, I'm 13 or above or whatever, or I'm 18 or over. All right, legally they have to stop, they're not allowed to keep and maintain that data, okay? So this can get you in trouble, even if the kid lies, all right? If the parents find out, they're on a site listening like, well, I have one of my students, what's that website that does all that anime? It's a Sony thing. I can't think of it. Crunchyroll, that's where he works. All right, he does security for them. This is one of his biggest worries. Because all these kids want to watch all these anime shows, and, you cannot be underage, but, you have all these 10, 12, 8, 9-year-olds clicking, I'm 13, sure. And if they start tracking them, that can get them in a lot of hot water. All right, so if you're Amazon or you have a different site, even if it's something that is unrelated, these are some things you got to worry about. And the agency that's going to come after you is not going to be the FBI or anything like that. It's going to be the Federal Trade Commission. All right, those are the guys you do not want to mess with. If you ever meet them, they have no sense of humor. All right, that's the thing. So these are things you have to make sure you have safeguards for. You have to have data deletion policies and all these kind of things where you make sure that these things get audited and validated and verified. Okay. Now, how many of you might work for a healthcare company? Okay, so you're going to hear this one thrown out there a lot, HIPAA, right? Now, I am by no means an expert at HIPAA, but this is one of the laws you're going to have to deal with out there. And what does this maintain is the privacy aspect in cybersecurity, okay? We have the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act out there. Oh, HIPAA is enforced by what group? What part of the government would do the enforcement of that?
Office of Civil Rights.
Huh?
Office of Civil Rights.
Department of Health and Human Services actually has the authority to do that, to actually do prosecution of that. Yeah, we're talking high-level departments. All right. So, also we have the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. Okay. So, how many of you work for a company that's publicly traded stock? All right. So this is something you got to worry about. These are your financials, how they have to be kept secret and all that. All right. Who enforces this? Department of Commerce, SEC. All right. So you have the SEC out there. And Sarbanes-Oxley Act, another one enforced by the SEC. They will come after you. They love coming after these folks. And this controls stuff for public companies, like their other things. It's very similar, the same controls for GLBH and Sarbanes-Oxley, but GLBH is mainly FISMA regulations also for publicly traded companies and their banks and all that. So a lot of banks would have to do this, not credit unions, but mainly any kind of federally registered bank. How many of you heard of DORA? I know it's a U.S. regulations, but how many of your companies do business in Europe that are American? Did you know that European laws apply to you? Shocker, isn't it? You know? What do you mean I have to abide by a company by a bunch of, bean eaters over in the, beans and toast people, whatever, over there in Europe, Luxembourg? I've had some interesting experiences in Luxembourg. But I digress. That'll be a story for another day. So, it's the Digital Operational Resilience Act. It's a European regulation that creates that binding thing for communication technology and all that. So we have that out there that you have to be aware of and apply. We also have to apply to industry standards. Are these laws? No. But what happens if you don't comply with these? Huh? They'll hammer you because they'll say, there might as well be laws. These are industry standards. And if you don't comply with them, you get kicked out of that. So if you're doing PCI DSS, All right, guess what? You can't take credit cards if you cannot be compliant with this. So that's pretty much a private law, okay? So the difference between public law and private law, public law is developed by the government. Public law is developed by the government. Private law could be determined by industry or by contracts, okay? When you do the contractual agreements with a company like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, henceforth you agree to abide by a private law, which is up here. And the other things out there, if you're dealing with the government, and if you ever have to deal with any kind of thing where the FTC is going to come after you, any kind of trade or commerce out there, the Federal Trade Commission always defaults to NIST standards. Now, if you ever look at NIST standards, what are they always focused on? Controls and guidance for the federal government only. All right? Everywhere it says, this is this. But that's why everyone in private industry takes NIST standards, because the FTC can come after them and they default to their reference, which is NIST standards. Okay? So that's something that you want to be aware of. And then we have the state breach notification laws. How many states have breach notification laws? Hint, it's up there. How many states have breach notification? Come on. 12? More than 12. All 50 states, right? Are they all the same? No. Hell no. All right? So here's a link to IT Governance USA, and they have a breakdown of all 50 states. Some have these 30-day notices, some have 90-day notices. Some, and they vary in between. Some give you 45 days. Some are worded as fun as soon as possible, or as soon as the breach is, or as soon as you're made aware of the breach, you have 3 days to set the notification. All right. So how can you be verified? That's where all these wordplay comes into effect. Huh? How do you define a breach? Exactly. So there is no normalcy, but one of the ones that is the most stringent and well-written is the California Consumer Privacy Act and Data Breach Notification Law. Now, ironically, the state of Texas revised theirs to pretty much mimic that. It's almost like somebody did a copy-paste from cut California, paste Texas. It's pretty much almost identical now. Somebody decided to do it. And a lot of the states are following suit to do the same thing. Massachusetts did one that's very similar to that also. Except I think in one of their things they left California in there. I'm just kidding. Yeah. So yeah, it's there for that. We also have international regulations. Like I said, are we subject to international laws when we're doing business here in the United States? All right. What's the big one that everybody was the buzzword bingo of 4 years ago? GDPR. All right. And this is a EU law for protecting personal data. Now, you're welcome to go download the law and read it. Okay? It's not actually very long. It's actually very readable. The problem is, there's been tons of people who've written papers and articles on it, which make it more convoluted than what it is. Okay? They give recommendations based on, heck, there's even textbooks on this stuff out there. So it's all subject to interpretation, GDPR laws. All right? And so you're going to get it in 2 weeks, where I have to do a whole lesson on GDPR. That's going to be like a 3-hour class. So I also teach at a college. Some of my students are here today. So yeah, and I will say this: a lot of states, including the California Consumer Protection Act, was based on GDPR, and that's basically their law is known as GDPR Light. Okay. So what are cybersecurity breach notifications? Well, they're mandatory reporting of breaches to affected individuals. How many of you have gotten one of those? Who has? All right, seriously, if you didn't raise your hand, do you not own a credit card or have you never been online? I mean, I have so many of these in there. I ignore them now. Huh?
You don't get the free credit monitoring every time you get something?
I have lifetime credit monitoring because I had a security violation because of my security clearance. So Office of Personnel Management got breached, and mine was one of the ones taken over. So yes, it's funny. I can see how many people are always pinging me and ask, I look at my authenticators because my stuff is out there. I have complex passwords. I have all this stuff, but I can see how many people are trying to log in as me all over the world, to different sites and stuff. It's kind of interesting. I get these occasionally somebody like, if you look in your authenticators, your MFA things, you can see where login attempts come from. I don't know if y'all ever looked at that, but you can see that. So what are the legal requirements? And as somebody already pointed out, they stole my thunder. What constitutes a breach? Can you define it? All right, and who needs to be notified in the breach? Just those affected or anybody potentially affected? That's the question, right? All right.
Was the data downloaded or was it just you?
Yeah. Can you prove it was, they even looked at it? Can they prove it? Now, I can get into countermeasures and say, yes, how, even if it was downloaded, it was encrypted using da-da-da. But it just depends on how that can be. I work for a bank, so everything's encrypted. Or I try to make sure everything's encrypted, right? Either in transit, in motion, and we have some challenges of doing it in use. 3 states of data: data in motion, data in transit, or data at rest, and data at use. All right, so Texas law requires the business and organizations that experience that data breach that affects, get this, 250 more Texans. So there has to be 250 more Texans that are affected. Okay? You could have 1,000 people in New Mexico, don't care. That goes to the New Mexico state, or Oklahoma, nah. So we have 250 Texans or more that has to be affected, okay? And they have to make the notification to the Office of the Texas Attorney General out there within 30 days after the discovery of the breach. All right. So again, what constitutes a breach and what constitutes when they discovered it? When the investigation starts or when the investigation is concluded that they conclusively determined that there was actually a breach. All right. Huh? That's a good question for the lawyers. All right? And people will argue over that. Because at that time, it's like Schrodinger's cat. It seriously is at that point, and that's how it's described. Is it or is it not? It's that area of it. And so until it's really kind of, my opinion is until it's conclusively determined, because what if you prematurely say I got breached? What would be the reputational damage to my company? But it turns out, oh, my bad, I wasn't breached. It was just, a glitch, and nothing really happened. My bad. You're still going to have the reputation slap, right? Okay, so it's like that Schrodinger's cat moment.
But some companies will use that.
It just depends on the ethics of the person pulling the trigger. All right?
I do incident response, and we have had an email in case somebody had an incident, and it was breach at our company name.
Mm-hmm.
And lawyers said, we will never have anybody email that. And we were like, what? And it's like, that's admitting to a breach. And we're like, okay. So we had to change it to incident at.
Correct. That's actually a really good example. He was talking about they had an email called breach@company.com. The lawyer said no, because that's pretty much confirming that there is a breach and somebody admitting to it. Therefore, they changed the name to incident. All right, because if somebody did say, hey, there's a breach, but it turned out to be A, not qualifying for a notification, or, something along those lines, it could be. But incidents happen, right? Stuff happens. And what constitutes an incident? It's like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, okay? So, what do we do about all these laws? Well, that's where I come into play as a security architect. I create the frameworks for which, we can operate within these parameters, all right? And then I have to also make it so we have that fun thing called checkbox security. How many of you heard of checkbox security? Don't you all love it? All right? You got that auditor in there with the clipboard going, yep, I've had so many auditors when I was in operations ask me something, and I'm like, I don't think that really pertains here. Well, then, no, it's not implemented. I'm like, not saying it's not implemented. I don't think you understand what you're asking. All right? And that's a lot of times. I remember I had one auditor spend too much time with me, and his supervisors came over and was like, what's going on? He goes, this guy's telling me about how all this stuff works, and I had no idea. And he's like, you don't need to understand that. You just need to check the boxes. That's actually what this lady said to this kid who was like 3 weeks out of college. All right? He was an auditor for one of these accounting or one of these big agencies, and he had actually it was a notebook, a file book with paper, and he was asking me questions, and I was explaining them countermeasures and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. And so what we have to do is make sure, as part of our checkbox security, everything has the acceptable use policies, security rule audits, and all that happen. We have to make sure, things are encrypted. We have to make sure employees are trained and understand the access controls. We have to have that incident response plan and all that favor out there. Now, my role does not make sure it's there. I have to make sure there's quality along with that. So it can be effective because we are serious about security where I work because it's trillions of dollars. It's a very large bank. So what we try and do is we make sure that there is substance along with that. And we try and enforce these controls that are actually of measured value. But we have to also do it in a manner that it has to be easily explained for an auditor to understand so they can check that box. Okay? All right. Well, I'm actually done. So the key takeaway is compliance with cybersecurity is critical for data protection. All right? That's basically what it is. You have all this, you need to know the laws because I always ask her, why in the hell are we doing it this way anyway? All right? And now, unfortunately, that guy no longer works with us. And I went and I got a 4.0 in this damn degree, spent $50K, and said, you know what? I can now answer why we do this thing this way. I can connect those dots. Hey, it's only 3 months' salary, so what? So, what? So, what? It's been a long, I'm old, I don't do on-call anymore, and I've worked my way up there, okay? So, all right, so we have a common sense security strategy. Now we have to include our legal, and we have to understand it from all our levels. So I want to evangelize. If you do not understand the law, and you understand why are we doing it this way, go out and start reading some of the laws related to cybersecurity. There's plenty of resources out there. This way it'll give you an understanding. This way, when you're talking to your higher level management, you can articulate the reasons why this is done, and you can communicate it to other team members out there. This will give you an advantage in your career just by understanding the reasons of why certain things have to be done, why we have to have this stupid checkbox security. Because we're always like, I want to architect something that's really strong, really fortified. That was my main goal is, build the security. Why do I have to do this with all this, logging in there? Because it's the law. I can just drop all these, packets that are rejected, No, certain issues, you have to log everything and keep it for how long? A certain amount of time. All these regulations come into play. So the more you understand about the regulations that control your industry in cybersecurity, the more advantage you have in advancing your careers, because you'll be able to articulate the reasons why some of this has to be done. Okay? Yes?
What would you say is like a good starting place? Would it be like NIST, like really digesting that framework, or something else?
Well, yeah, the NIST cybersecurity framework is one of the best things where any cybersecurity student should start. That's the one that controls the idea, the concepts. That's where most architectural frameworks are derived from. Whether you're talking about privacy of data or actually security controls and countermeasures that enable us to set up our actual defenses, where firewall, network perimeter, and all that. As you read through other things like that, you're great. Stay away from ISO 27001. Nobody wants to spend that money. And I've never found anybody who's actually read that. Yes?
I have more of a systematic question.
Uh-huh.
There are so many regulations, NYDFS, CCPA,
Yep.
DORA. Is there a platform that maps all these different regulations and gives you what the lowest common denominator is and what's the delta, what's unique to European laws and U.S. federal or state?
You know, that's a great opportunity out there for somebody. Okay?
It exists. It's called if you go to Secure Controls Framework,
Okay. There,
they have the comprehensive list of 279, so I just calculated it, different frameworks, regulations and stuff.
but that's controls that are mapped to those regulations.
Yeah, and they,
Right.
but this spreadsheet is 1,000.
I have one of those spreadsheets too. I get one of those emailed to me every 3 weeks where I work.
So we're
But-
using Excel?
Huh?
We're using Excel?
Don't have Excel.
It is, yeah, it's still on Excel, but there's, it's mapped to a Confluence wiki too. You can just download and copy it into an Excel so I can do filtering. But it's in a Confluence.
The Secure Controls Framework, if you read through their documentation, they walk you through, all right, how to select what applies to you, and determining for whatever applicable controls there are, maturity level,
Right.
your practice, and such.
Right, so yes, the Security Control Framework, that website is good for those mappings, but are you saying that it's anything like a website that has a listing of every cybersecurity law that could be out there? I have to search on different websites to get that level of information. His thing, like what he refers to, I am familiar with your site, but you know, it's kind of like a mapping of NIST 800, SP 853, along with that, with references to laws. It doesn't actually contain all those laws, does it? Does it actually, if you click on it, or it just takes you a link?
It's got the along the top, the notes,
Yeah,
they include a link to the applicable
it's
law.
the link to the thing. So there's no really a comprehensive site where everything is, it just links to other things. But yeah, and one thing is, it's probably the best thing to do, because laws are constantly changing and regulations are constantly changing.
They update every quarter.
Yeah, that's why I get one, I think, every couple of weeks, based on different laws.
Closest thing I know to that, and I bought one several years ago for several $100s, but I haven't been updating it. But Walter's Kluwer
Walter's clear, yeah.
has I don't know how big it is now, but back when I bought it, like probably 8 years ago, it was a big binder, and it had, it was designed to be updated, but it didn't seem to update pages and stuff, but they were tracking stuff. So there's all kinds of firms, mostly law or big accounting firms,
You-
will track that stuff for a fee.
Yeah, they will charge you a fee, but you also have cornell.law.edu or law.cornell.edu, which has a lot of the different laws out there that you can download for free, especially U.S. regulatory laws and all that. ANISA also has a lot of the European laws. There's certain like data breach laws for like Brazil, South Africa, New Zealand, and all those places. New Zealand also is a good website that collects a lot of laws. I cannot remember what their website is, but they cover a lot of cybercrime laws.
The ISO ones are expensive.
Which ones?
The ISO ones.
ISO ones are standards, and they're more of a framework. They don't really, I don't consider those laws. They're suggestions, and you know, they're in Swiss francs, but you can go to ANSI here in the United States and get the thing priced in dollars, and I think it's actually a few dollars cheaper than converting it to Swiss francs. Yes.
What are the laws and regulations that you would want to keep in your back pocket when it comes to AI?
That is a loaded question. In what context?
Wouldn't the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act apply to that?
Well, of course, that applies to any electronic device, whether it be a phone or any kind of thing. Even your car computer technically can apply to that. But for the AI one, see, the one that's different things, because AI offers challenges about like privacy, because it ingests a lot of things, and it won't discern you. So a lot of the privacy laws are what would be more concerning for me on those. So, COPA would be one if it takes something from kids, but then there's a lot of any kind of PII considerations. If it's gathering health data, then definitely HIPAA would be come into play. If we're gathering financial information that's not public, like that would be something that could be a concern for me also, yes.
The NIST AI risk management framework is going to be probably your best source.
Right. But that's for risk management. That doesn't directly indicate any legislative laws. Now, the thing is, though, I will say this. Laws lag behind technology to be about 10 years or more, okay? Some of the laws get amended to adapt, and I don't think any laws are really applicable to AI at this time, specifically to AI, unless it could be a data privacy law, some of those data privacy laws out there.
Or company policy for intellectual property, where people are putting
Right.
information in there and getting answers, and they're not realizing that.
It stays in there and it's ingested and can be used. Yeah. And that could come under private law, under acceptable use policies and contractual laws for that matter. But at that point, that could be even considered a breach by somebody voluntarily exposing information into a publicly available AI.
Not only data, but like if you're developing
Your code.
you need something and you want to do whatever you've given a private.
All right. I've been given the stop sign. Thank you for coming. I hope it didn't put you to sleep.